Players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most revered in the history of Magic the Gathering. Amped Raptor, Didgeridoo, Ave Progenitor Ooze, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy and the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind Bosch & Roll on YouTube, Arabian University, and theepicstorm.com. This episode is sponsored by Moxfield and financial advisor and certified financial planner Nicholas Robb.
Hello, and welcome to episode 147 of the Eternal Glory podcast, Big Ban Reactions. We've already recorded 30 minutes of introduction and banter for the week, available in our supporter-exclusive pre-show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access, or join as a YouTube member for the same content on YouTube instead. As always, I'm Phil Gallagher, aka Thraben U.
I am Brian Coval, aka Bosch & Roll.
And I am Bryant Cook of the Epic Storm.
Shout out to our new Patreon and YouTube members. Since the last episode, we've got Mark C., Jeff, Ethan S., Mike S., Adam S., Squestern, an internet name that I didn't bother to read before I just sent it, Diogo O., Nathan W., and Matt K. All of them are enjoying that pre-show. And this is a new thing moving forward. Remember last episode where we encouraged you to listen on Spotify if it's all the same to you? We don't care about that anymore. We changed some stuff in the back end, partnered with a new hosting service. You can listen wherever you want. A little bonus there, or a little growing pain, whatever you want to call it. The new platform does what's called dynamically inserted ads. At the start of the pod and somewhere in the middle, there will be some ads that just got dropped in. They won't be read in our voice. We don't know what they're going to be necessarily. Our Patreon feed will be free of those ads. If you don't want to hear those, $5 a month gets you off the hook for those 2 episodes. But don't worry about Spotify. Join the Patreon. Winners all around. New Patreon perk unlocked.
To win in Magic, adjust your strategy as the game changes. The same is true of investments. Nicholas Robb, financial advisor and certified planner, can help you create a game plan for your financial goals. Call 314-968-3783 or email nicholas.ropp@edwardjones.com. That's nicholas.raupp@edwardjones.com to get started today. Edward Jones, member, SIPC.
If you're interested in advertising to 10,000 plus Eternal gamers every episode, reach out to us. We're always accepting new sponsors.
And with that, let's go ahead and get into it. I am really excited for this episode. All 3 of us have recorded our own individual takes, but now we're coming together to combine it all, see what we think about the BNR update. But before we do that, where were we as of last episode? What did we as a podcast say should happen to Legacy?
I happen to remember quite well, gentlemen. Brian Bosch & Roll Coval over there wanted Sowing Mycospawn gone. All 3 of us wanted Undercity Informer gone. And then Phil and I were sort of... I definitely wanted Entomb. Phil was 50-50 on Troll of Khazad-dûm Entomb, and Brian was Troll of Khazad-dûm. So all 3 of us were losers on Undercity Informer. Brian was a winner on Troll of Khazad-dûm, and I'll give Phil partial credit on Troll of Khazad-dûm. The 3 of us were sort of split 50-50 on Troll versus Entomb.
So rephrasing that slightly, I think all of us wanted Sowing Mycospawn gone. All of us wanted Troll or Entomb gone. And all of us wanted Oops to take a hit. So we had 3 things that we wanted to happen.
Yeah, we got 2 of them. Not a bad conversion rate.
2 out of 3 ain't bad, as the famous Magic grinder Meatloaf once said.
Sorry, that's unlocked me. I had a good response, but then I immediately started singing Meatloaf in my head. Great job, Meatloaf. So I just want to say on the point of Undercity Informer, I think we also called out the One Ring as the next card that could be banned, laying under the surface. I genuinely don't think the One Ring is going to be legal in 2026. I think we have 2 or 3 ban updates before that point, and I would be surprised if it survives the year, but it wasn't the immediate problem, and Wizards has, time and time again, showed us they only really want to attack the immediate problems. So while we only got 2 of our 3 definite hits, and we didn't get our maybe hit, We have had a steady track record of calling everything 3 months before it happens. Grief, Psychic Frog, Vexing Bauble, Sowing Mycospawn, and something out of Reanimator, which turned out to be Troll of Khazad-dûm. Each of those things we were calling for a full ban cycle before they were actually done, and each of them ended up actually happening. So are we calling it? Are we making it happen? That's a joke, but because we don't work at Wizards of the Coast, we don't make it happen. Even though somebody last week called us Joe Rogan of Magic the Gathering or whatever. Fuck that, by the way. Joe Rogan platforming vaccination deniers and Holocaust deniers is not the same as us having opinions about Magic the Gathering. So please don't compare us to Joe Rogan. But all of that aside, we have eventually gotten all the things we asked for 3 months after we asked for it. So Understudy Informer and the One Ring, is that what's going to happen? June 30th is the next update. There's a little bit of a drag, but we do seem to have our fingers on the pulse.
So when I recorded my own reaction to this, I thought about what they were saying about Moon Stompy at the end of their article, and my read on that was probably, we're watching the One Ring, because I think that is the potential outlier card in any sort of Ancient Tomb decks right now.
Right. Let's dig into that when we actually go into the article. But yes, it is clear that the One Ring is floating just below the surface of shit that really is obviously a problem. And I think Nadu is my runner-up after the One Ring of things that are still bubbling that may or may not actually be a problem.
My opinion on Nadu has gone down a little bit every time there's a BNR update at this point. I'm just not convinced every time. Like, I have friends that play it, and I watch them play, and I feel like the actual dedicated Nadu decks have to jump through so many hoops to be successful, where I'm not sure if that's going to happen just because there's so much good interaction in Legacy. But we'll come back to that, because good interaction is a problem with Oops All spells.
Right, yeah. I mean, I don't really have a problem with Nadu. I have never... I don't think in the history of cards I've been so conflicted about whether it should or should not be legal. It's like maybe Oko is the last time where I was like, what's everyone mad about? But obviously Oko was busted. And now I'm like, what's everyone mad about? Or am I too mad? And it's basically, am I currently losing to a Nadu or not is what determines where my opinion is on the Nadu card. You look at the list and like you said, they're doing a lot. They need a 1/1 to stick. They need to resolve their 3-drop that's also blue in a Daze Pyroblast format. How is this ever going to work? But then you go back and forth, you exchange some resources, and they resolve their stupid-ass bird, and you lose. And it's like, oh, maybe this card is busted. I don't know. But we're not here to talk about Nadu. We're here to talk about what we did get and where the metagame's going. What are our initial impressions, the quick hits?
I recorded mine live, so I read the news as it happened, and my initial thought was this wasn't enough. I didn't believe that Troll of Khazad-dûm was going to be a big enough hit for Reanimator, and I still believe, even after my initial impression of 24 hours later, that Oops All Spells is going to be a top deck in the new metagame. I think even with people gunning for it, the deck is too good, so I think Oops is going to rise to the top.
So, Phil, before you do your part and I do mine, let's actually read the ban update.
Oh, I guess we could do that.
In case any of our listeners are living under a rock with their fingers in their ears, Standard, Pioneer, and Vintage all had no changes. Modern, Underworld, Breach is banned. Legacy, Sowing Mycospawn, and Troll of Khazad-dûm are banned. Pauper, Basking Broodscale, Kuldotha Rebirth, and Deadly Dispute banned. Prophetic Prism and High Tide unbanned. And then there are no changes to the arena formats.
I would just like to say Underworld Beach sounds like a really good holiday card from Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah, I think that would play. That's a beach I could never go to. I guess, like, the sun is my problem with the beach. And if you're in the underworld, there's no sun, right? It's just generically hotter because there's fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't actually know how that would work out for me and my pasty complexion.
All right, so when I read the BNR article, my immediate thought was like, damn, Carmen knew what she was talking about in writing this debrief. It was very well written. It showed that she, as the, face of this BNR, at least for Legacy, knew the major pressure points. I was very, very critical of some of the last BNR updates for being poorly written, not really... I can't say what I want to say kindly, so I am not going to say it. But some of the previous BNR updates were not well written, in my opinion. And this one read well and clearly understood that Reanimator was a major pressure point on the format and sowing Mycospawn was a major pressure point. And we also got allusions to the fact that Oops All Spells is on the shit list and that Ancient Tomb decks are, we're keeping an eye on them as well. I think this was a good update, even if I didn't get everything that I wanted.
I think that Carmen's write-up was thorough. She said a lot of things that I have felt to be true for several months now about the cards that did get banned. And she acknowledged directly as things they're watching are the all-in and fast mana decks. And she named specifically Oops All Spells and Blood Moon Stompy, which Undercity Informer and the One Ring are our other two candidates from our last episode that didn't happen this time, but they are on the watch list now. So I think this, once again, it's Wizards of the Coast just lightly picking the boot up off the neck of the format rather than shaking it off and airing it out, which has been pretty clearly their approach to the format. I know we have wanted 5 or 6 changes, like 4 or 5 bans plus 3 or 4 unbans for the last several updates. And it is clear, show don't tell, they are not going to do that. And they are going to just scrape off the top crusty, scabby layer of the format and see what fresh blood is underneath and see if that scabs over again or if it heals. And that seems to be how they're going to do this moving forward.
I watched Daily MTG today, and a comment from that echoes what Brian just said. Carmen stated that they're never going to open the gates and do a big unbanning in Legacy. I am someone that thinks that Frantic Search should come off, Mind Twist, Survival of the Fittest. Like, we don't need to talk about all the individual cards, but there's a number of cards like Memory Jar, for example, that could come off. Carmen said today, not going to happen. We're lucky if we get one card a year. And that's just the reality of the situation. She mentioned Mind's Desire being a good testing of that, but there's never going to be 2 that come off at the same time or more. So we need to readjust our expectations for what we want if we want to be happy playing Legacy.
We should keep asking, though. And that is if our voices are heard inside Wizards of the Coast, if we are secretly controlling the ban list, as some YouTube commenters seem to believe we are, then we have to keep saying the things we want to happen. And we have to keep pushing while also existing in this system we do have. And, just like in real life, you don't like the system, you do what you can, but you also keep letting your voice be heard.
So at the time of recording, how many leagues has everyone managed to squeeze in? I've got 2 Legacy leagues post-banning.
Yeah, I have 2. I played one with a control deck and one with a combo deck.
I recorded Pauper High Tide and then did not record today because I have a day job. So 0 Legacy leagues for me.
Fair enough. But yeah, at least you're on that high tide grind. That's more important. Honestly, leaving that to the Bryant Cooks of the world, in the words of Patrick Sullivan, figure out combo. I agree. I am excited for your high tide video more than I am excited to whatever else is going on with the Epic Storm and Legacy.
Yeah, agreed.
And as a seamless heads up here, all of our decks end up over on moxfield.com. Just throwing it out there. If you want to see what Bryant is doing with High Tide, if you want to see what I am doing with, the Moon Stompy deck post-banning or an Aether Vial deck like Goblins, all that stuff is up there. And those are usually live before the videos are by a pretty significant margin.
Yeah, just today when I was trying to figure out what do I want to do first in the control sphere, now that basic lands are unbanned, I went into my Moxfield, into my Legacy YouTube deck folder that has close to 500 videos in it, and I typed hot bant, and it gave back 15 or 20 responses, and I had lots to pull from. So the 4-color Bant Bosch and Roll special is the first on the plate for me.
All right, so let's dig into some of the text here. I know that I have a particular line that resonated well with me, but it was towards the end. Do you want me to start at the end, or?
I don't think we should read the whole thing.
Right. This is on magic.wizards.com if you want to go read it in its entirety yourself. I think that I think we just rubber stamp Standard, Pioneer, Modern. Actually, there is something I want to talk about in Standard, just a real quick, because it's relevant to Wizards of the Coast ban philosophy, even if it's not relevant to our audience directly. Jadine Klemperens, Carmen's wife, wrote this one. They both work in play design or are designers. And Jadine said that they are sticking to once a year bans for Standard unless there is an emergency. There will be ban updates where they let you know they are aware of the metagame, but they really only want to ban cards when the format is about to rotate, which happens, I think the fall set every year is when Standard bumps the last year of sets out, because there was a lot of talk. It seemed like Monstrous Rage was a foregone conclusion. There was a lot of people talking about This Town Ain't Big Enough and Up the Beanstalk as an engine that needs to be broken up somewhere, and no changes to Standard. And the double down of, we will touch this once a year. We want Standard to be stable. Unless there is a serious heckin' problem, we are not touching it. So I thought that was at least worth mentioning. Just trying to figure out and predict how Wizards is going to approach banning in the future.
Since we're talking about cadence and how it's relevant, something I pulled from Daily MTG today. So they talked about ban cadence. This was Carmen, and it was Gavin Verhey. So they said they are sticking to the quarterly ban cadence. So the next one is June 30th. They don't plan on changing it. They said people deserve to know how long things will be around and that not everyone plays frequently. There are some people that play once a month or once every other month, and it's not fair to them to have constant changes. They said that most of the cadence complaints that they receive are from people that are highly engaged in the game and that they're trying to think of people that are less engaged. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, because I've played Paper most of my life. It wasn't until the pandemic lockdown that I really switched to Magic Online constantly due to, just changes in my life, like having a kid and stuff like that. But I knew a lot of people that would just disappear for a bit. And then you would see them a year later and they're like, yeah, I didn't find playing in the Gideon format really all that fun. Just when Zendikar was around, for example, or whatever. And I don't think those people are on Twitter yelling at Gavin Verhey being like, I don't like this format right now. It's like those sort of people are the voices they never hear, the people that just disappear from game stores for a couple of years because they didn't find it fun anymore. So I don't know if I loved that as a comeback to people complaining about the cadence, because I do think once a quarter is kind of long, but I just think, only the loud people are the ones that dislike it. I just don't think that's true. There's a lot of people that just don't voice their opinion.
Yeah, it's complicated because we are speaking without the infrastructure of a Fortune 500 company and their market research behind us, which Gavin and Carmen do have when they make statements like that. And there are the people like us who are the ones that would like things to happen as soon as there's a problem. There are people like the guy you described. And yeah, I've met those guys too, where it's just, I didn't enjoy playing against Bitter Blossom. So I didn't play block or standard until Lauren rotated. Like, those people exist. It's tough because there are just the normal people who have like one deck and they show up at FNM and they don't really think about Magic for the 6 days and 20 hours in between their 4 hours at FNM every week. And those people are probably significantly higher representation of who's spending money on this game than people who are hosting podcasts. And yeah, it's tough to balance. I don't know. Obviously, I would want everything the way I want it, but I also just try to give the benefit of the doubt to people who I genuinely trust. And Carmen and Gavin have mostly earned my trust over time, more so than other Wizards employees or other Wizards phases who have been on the stage making statements before.
I would like to say they're doing a great job, and I'm not trying to come at them whatsoever. I really do believe that. I love the transparency, and I think they're really good at what they do, even if I don't necessarily agree with the decisions made.
Yep, for sure. Okay, so Pioneer, nothing happened. Modern, Underworld Breach banned. We don't need to spend a lot of time on that. And Vintage, I just want to hit that one real quick. No changes. And this is important. The only card mentioned in the entire Vintage article is Lyris of the Dream Den. They did not talk about Stock Up, which is a card that a lot of people who are engaged in Vintage, certainly at least in my YouTube comments, have been like, Stock Up getting restricted at the end of March. And I don't think that needs to happen. It wasn't on my radar as something that should happen. And Wizards didn't even mention it. The only card mentioned was Luris. So stock up, not on their radar. Get used to it, at least for now. And no changes until June 30th means that the NYSE Open, the Power 9 tournament, is not, this is the format we're going to have for that tournament. And then the Steel City Spectacular in August, another Black Lotus tournament. There might be updates before then, but we at least have one thing locked in, and we know that Luris is the card they're talking about. I'm ready to talk about Legacy now. We did all the other things.
So there was a line that I wanted to zero in on in the Sowing Mycospawn section. It just resonated very, very deeply with me. So, quote, Sowing Mycospawn is so good at attacking lands, often 2 at a time and even hitting basic lands, that it has caused environmental pressures on the format, compressing games to the first handful of turns, and, in this emphasis mine here, putting the Magic play experience at risk, end quote. And I think that is a very, very powerful thing to say when you are banning a Magic card, that Sowing Mycospawn was literally ruining games of Magic. It was making the play experience so bad.
I would like to revisit the thing that I read online earlier, which was from Ari Lax of the Dominaria podcast, which is that Sowing Mycospawn was banned because of the experience that it gave players. Ari was like, if we're going to ban cards based on vibes, why is Undercity Informer still legal? Because effectively, they're both sort of miserable play experiences. They both effectively end the game very quickly, and they're not super fun. I mean, I'm the one that likes doing degenerate combo stuff, I get it, but I don't even think playing or facing Oops All spells is all that fun. Like, a number of my friends have actually switched to playing Oops All spells because it's so good from Doomsday and other decks. And they're just like, yeah, the deck is super boring, but it wins, and I like winning. And that's the sort of thing, but Sowing Mycospawn isn't that different. So if we're willing to ban Sowing Mycospawn for being miserable, I think Undercity Informer should have been had.
I don't disagree, and I want to take what Phil said and what Bryant said and what Ari said and focus on the first paragraph of the Legacy article. The first sentence is, by the numbers, the Legacy of today does a good job of emulating a balanced format. And then yada, 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 a bunch of call outs to specific decks and stuff. And then the last sentence of that same paragraph. It's apparent to us that people who love to play Legacy do not love to play today's Legacy. We are taking a couple steps to try and improve the format. So there were viable decks, a bunch of them. They shared metashare. Nothing was over the line of win rates or play rates, really. It was just they saw enthusiasm and tournament attendance and everything dropping. And that is something that needs to be maintained outside of just these pure number robot people on Twitter who think, like, as long as 5 or 6 decks are viable, we're fine and everything's good. There's just more going on than that, and Wizards of the Coast understands that.
So, Bryant, when I recorded my own BNR update, I think one of the things I ended it with was taking that quote that I just read and just replacing Sowing Mycospawn with a card from Oops All Spells. Just Oops All Spells compresses games to the first handful of turns and puts the Magic play experience at risk. I was very much on the same page there.
So I'm not going to play devil's advocate because I don't think that's a useful thing. I'm going to say something that I actually believe in, which is that a card like Sowing Mycospawn that is just a slot in a deck that otherwise still functions. You could still cast turn 2 Thought-Knot Seer. You could still ramp out the One Ring. You could still have turn 1 Chalice of the Void, turn 2 Glaring Fleshraker, start burning people out. The Eldrazi deck still works. It just also had this horseshit in it. That's different than Oops All Spells, which is a deck that cannot play lands. It has to get to 4 mana. It has to beat a counterspell. And it's very good at doing all those things. I agree. Like, you heard me, I'm on record. I think Undercity Informer should have been banned. I'm just saying it is not apples to apples here when we're talking about an entire deck feeding one engine, even if that engine's miserable, versus just something that, in Carmen's own words, destroys the Magic play experience as just like a card in an otherwise fully functional deck. I think there is a meaningful difference here.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that.
So The TLDR that I received from reading this was with Sowing Mycospawn being banned, they're hoping that Control comes back. And with Control coming back, they're hoping that it can keep Oops All Spells in check. And now I would like to return to the interaction part that I wanted to discuss earlier, put on hold earlier, which is that Oops All Spells, we talked about it in one of the more recent episodes where it's not like Force of Negation isn't that good against it because you have to hit like a Lotus Petal or like really uncomfortable things that normally you wouldn't counter because their payoffs are all creatures. And there's not a whole lot you can do with against Oops All Spells if they pivot into their creature beatdown plan. Like, are you leaving in Swords to Plowshares hoping to hit a Rotting Regisaur? Like that sort of thing. So instead of just complaining about Oops All Spells all the time, I've decided to come to this episode with a possible solution that I've been told is terrible by all of my friends.
Let's go. I love this.
Alex McKinley's the only one that is willing to listen to my madman rants on this. And I believe that Subtlety is a card that is worth exploring. It is good versus their main deck plan of Undercity Informer, Bellystrade Spy, and it's good against their sideboard juke of a bunch of creatures because they want to go Dark Ritual, large creature. And if you can Subtlety it, yeah, it's only a delay. I get that. It's not a counterspell. But putting the Rotting Regisaur on the top or the bottom buys you a few turns to get into the point of the game where control decks can thrive or blue decks can thrive against Oops All Spells. Because basically, you just need to make sure you're not losing the game ultra fast. So Subtlety hits everything that isn't exactly Goblin Charbelcher. And I think that's a really interesting spot. However, all of my friends just keep on telling me that this is stupid because you need to be able to stop the Informer. If you can at least delay it, you get a couple turns to cantrip, maybe then you find a Force of Will or something else. Like, I just think that Subtlety is worth exploring. It might not be the perfect answer, but it's good against their plan A and their plan B.
Yeah, I am not afraid of a Subtlety. I did a quick Moxfield search of my decks that I've posted, and 49 decks on my Moxfield contain Subtlety. So I'm not afraid of that card. I am impressed by it every time I play it. 4 comes online so much faster than 5 when we're talking about hardcast Solitude, hardcast Force of Will. Hardcasting that Subtlety and getting a beater is real deal. It doesn't do anything versus Entomb Reanimate, which is tough, but with that, maybe backed off a little bit. Maybe we have room to experiment with a card like Subtlety. If Oops All Spells rises to prominence, that is a card that's not embarrassing to put in your main deck as just a blue card draw style deck. And like, I don't think I'd put it in Delver. I don't think I'd put it in Storm and like a pitch of Brainstorm to cast it. But like, I have played Subtlety and I have enjoyed it.
We were complaining about like Cavern of Souls into Nadu earlier. It stops Cavern of Souls Nadu because it's not a counter spell. Like, I think that the card actually has a bunch of applications for fair blue mages.
So, Brian, would you play Subtlety versus, say, a Moon Stompy deck? Like, if that's in your sideboard, do you bring it in? Because it misses some really important stuff there, like the One Ring, but it can get you out of the early turns versus some of the aggressive creatures.
Yeah, absolutely. I would play Force of Negation. I would play as many Force of Negations are in my sideboard against Red Stompy, and that misses the Pyroglyphs and the Lelias and whatever else is going on. And if I'm willing to miss those to stop the One Ring, then I'm willing to miss the One Ring to stop those. I would just play as much interaction as I have versus decks like that. Especially that 4 versus 5 difference I was just talking about, huge versus Red, and getting a 3/3 into play. Yeah, I would play Subtlety versus Red Stompy if I had it.
And going back a little bit, Brian mentioned that it doesn't stop Entomb Reanimate. I was someone that wanted Entomb banned. Ultimately, it didn't happen. But there was something said in Daily MTG today, which is Carmen said that they're unlikely to ban a card that is 10 to 20 years old. That is why people play Legacy. That is the exact quote that Carmen said. And I think if that's true, it ultimately leads to what we currently experience with Daze. Daze protects Ragavan, Dreadhorde Arcanist, Oko, all of these broken things in the Delver shell. Power creep happens over time. Survival of the fittest, when they banned it, they said that they saw a problem with creatures getting better and better over time, and the fact that survival was only going to get better as the game continued to grow because there's so many creatures printed every set. Entomb is actually very similar to Survival of the Fittest, where creatures are printed every set. Not super large creatures for Entomb, but creatures are always being printed. So Entomb is only going to get better over time. This means that our ban list will get longer and longer, full of creatures. It will actually end up resembling Vintage with Mishra's Workshop. There's going to end up being some embarrassing cards on there in order to keep Entomb alive. And if that's what Wizards wants, I think we as a community need to accept it. I personally don't want to accept it, but if that's the rules of play, I mean, no one's clamoring for Mishra's Workshop to be banned in Vintage, right? Or restricted in Vintage.
Not anymore. We were for a long time until we settled in and got used to it. And I think they will ban new cards if they can, but if it is clear that the problem exists entirely among old cards, then I'm sure they would still take action, because a card that is older than Entomb is Reanimate. And are we protecting Reanimate by banning Entomb? Are we banning Reanimate to protect Entomb? If Entomb Reanimate continues to show up as just a mess of unbeatable stuff, then there are two old cards at the core of this interaction. Animate Dead is worse than Reanimate, but that's the oldest card here. It was an alpha. We'll see what that actually means when they start getting into it. I have already seen decks using Oliphant as Grixis Reanimator. It's just literally that deck, the Demir Reanimator deck, but with Dragon's Rage Channeler and Oliphant in it. And Oliphant's a little worse than Troll. You need to go into a third color. How much worse is that? Are we going to ban Oliphant next if this still doesn't work? If we ban Oliphant, are we going to ban the tree next, the green one?
Generous Ent.
Yeah, Generous Ent. If this continues to be a problem,
then we ban fucking Eagles of the North in Legacy.
Right. Leaving only Lauren Revealed Legal out of the cycle, that would be so sick. Blue mages rise up. What I'm saying here is there are people who already think it's absurd to ban Troll of Khazad-dûm over Entomb or Reanimate. And I think reasonable people could think that. But I think that giving Entomb and Reanimate a chance to live by banning Troll of Khazad-dûm is an experiment. I do not think we are going to ban one after the other Oliphant, Generous Ent, Eagles of the North as we eliminate this cycle of cards. I think if Oliphant builds of Tempo Reanimator are still busted, I think we'll unban Troll and we'll ban Entomb or Reanimate at that point.
I hope that's the case.
Do we have more we want to say about Legacy immediately, or do we want to talk about Pauper?
I love Pauper. My second favorite format at this point, and I'm not even saying that to be a shill. I genuinely love it.
Pauper's great. I agree. I think Pauper, I've said this a million times, but I'm going to say it again. I genuinely think Pauper is a better format than Legacy. I think it's a better format than Vintage. I think it's a better format than Modern. I think that in terms of if you want to play a deep card pool without a bunch of bullshit ruining the Magic play experience, Pauper is the place to do it. And shout out Pauper. I love Pauper. And they got the works. They got the Modern treatment from the last BNR this time around.
I guess I do have something that I should say, and you guys might not like it, but this BNR announcement is the third or fourth one in a row where I felt like they've been delayed by a ban cycle, where I thought to myself, I am becoming more open-minded, and I'm still against it, but I'm becoming more open-minded to a format panel. I don't think it will happen, but I just wish that we weren't always a cycle behind. I wish that we could just catch up and then have a grace period where Legacy's good for a year or so, instead of just always being, a step behind, wishing that they would have hit Psychic Frog or Grief or whatever in the previous one.
Yeah, I am still pretty against the idea, but also the Pauper format panel is doing a great job. So I'm just going to leave that alone.
I remain against, but I understand the sentiment here completely.
All right, switching over to Pauper. Basking Brood-Scale was banned. In the daily MTG update, Gavin Verhey said that had a win rate of 53.5%, which is under that 55% that a lot of BNR articles from the previous few years have used as the golden benchmark to be banned. But Gavin said that part of it was that the play experience was so bad. There was a lot of reports of people going to their local game stores and be like, oh, I haven't played Pauper in 6 months, and I'm dead on turn 3. That was fun. Things like that happening, because Pauper, there is a lot of online play, but there's a ton of paper play with Pauper too. It's very popular outside of the US. Here in the US, I've honestly played it in paper very few times. Like, the game stores around here don't really do it. But in Europe, for example, it's like one of their largest formats. So there was a lot of paper players that were unhappy with the play experience of Basking Brood Scale, and that 53.5% was close enough to be banned. And I thought that was just kind of interesting that it was play experience plus high play rate. And then Gavin said the other thing was people felt like they were using a lot of sideboard slots dedicated just to beat Brood Scale for it to still be that good.
Yeah, Brood Scale is, I think, an interesting case where I do think the established metagame was really healthy and cool. I think it was a cool part of that. I think having a infinite combo in Pauper that is susceptible to a card like Doomblade or Snuff Out or Scred, Lightning Bolt, all cards heavily played in the format, is cool. Even just like Echoing Truth, bouncing that thing, Annul out of the sideboard, a lot of blue decks playing that. It's a combo that is exploitable on the creature level, exploitable on the stack payoff level, and even if they execute the combo, they have an infinitely large creature and infinite colorless mana, but then they have to have another thing to do with that, or they have to connect in combat. I played a bunch of really cool games in my preparation for Chicago where my opponent would execute the Brood Scale combo, but I had Thorn of the Black Rose in play, which is a 1/3 death touch. And we got to play back and forth where they're top decking every turn with infinite mana, but they're not actually able to win because I have 3 counterspells in my hand. And what are we doing here? Like, I thought that was really cool. The invisible part is all the decks you just can't play because Brood Scale exists. And I actually have come around to thinking of it like Oko in Legacy. I did think the Oko meta was good. I do think Oko mirrors are high skill. I still believe that. I think Oko's a fun card, but it does completely obliterate entire archetypes. Oko is a lot like Sowing Mycospawn in that regard, where it is enabling some things and obliterating others. And Brood Scale is doing the same thing to Pauper on an invisible level that it takes somebody with like Wizards of the Coast scope to actually see that out in the world.
The next card I would like to talk about is Kodaltha Rebirth. They used the number that it had above, they didn't say the exact number, but above 70 win percentage for game 1 win rates online. Above 70%.
That is batshit insane.
And they said that a lot of the deck lists were boarding in 6 to 8 blasts, and the sideboard win percentage was still very high. So Kodaltha Rebirth is a card where Alex Ullman is a good friend of mine. We talk baseball all the time. He asks me questions about Pauper just to gauge how I'm feeling about it. I believe all 3 of us are pretty friendly with Alex, actually. And, you know, for a year or so, I've been telling Alex, Kodaltha Rebirth is the problem. But I've always felt like it was falling on deaf ears, right? And I was like, it enables the experimental synthesizer. It allows people to go wide with Goblin Bushwhacker. So that way spot removal isn't good because you have to have instant speed sweepers, all this stuff. And when I did my reaction video, I did this whole rant about how it needed to go. And then I refreshed the page, and for the first time, it was actually there. And I was just like, man, I feel like I've got some egg on my face because I was harping so hard that the PFP was never going to hit it. And PFP being the Pauper format panel. And I'm thrilled to see this card gone. I didn't know that the win rate of that deck was so high, but I'm glad it was finally hit because I think the red deck was secretly the best thing you could be doing for a long time. Like, it just never ran out of gas due to synthesizer plus Clockwork Percussionist. It got to go wide. It got to burn you out. It did everything. Like, that deck was just way over the line.
Yeah, the mono red aggro deck or red burn or some flavor of it has always been a top Pauper deck going all the way back to when you were just casting Chain Lightning and Fire Blast, or using Thermo Alchemist to get extra pings out of our spells. And it's just morphed into this incredible, it almost feels like aggro 8 cast in Legacy. Like the turn 1 Patches O'Houlihan into a bunch of stuff into, they could also burn you out. Also, they have Emery. Also, they have Thoughtcast. That's how this mono red deck felt when you played against it. But in addition to all that, if you did stabilize, if you did sweep their board from 2 cards and 3 mana at any point, they could hit you for 8 haste. Just Kodaltha Rebirth, Bushwhacker, bang, bang. They could sandbag that as long as they needed to. And they never needed to really shove it because every deck was on the back foot against them at all times. Rebirth was not on my radar because I tend to select 4 decks that naturally can beat red, but I'm very glad to see it go.
So I'm the casual player in the room this time. I've probably recorded one Pauper League in the past 2 or 3 months. And it was actually just 2 or 3 days ago that I recorded, right before the bannings. So I didn't know how good the red deck was. I was playing a blue-red control deck. I got crushed 3 rounds in a row. I felt so helpless. I was hitting my sideboard cards. It wasn't mattering. What's the name of the non-pirate sweeper?
Pirate Clasm.
All right, Pirate Clasm.
It's actually called Fiery Cannonade for the people at home.
Yeah, there we go. I like had Fiery Cannonade. I'm like, all right, I'm going to wipe the board. I cast it, and then I realized one of those goblin fuckers is randomly just a pirate. And I was like, why?
Yeah, Breath Weapon is the same card, but it doesn't hit dragons. Like, you should probably just be on Breath Weapon. And that's the thing. Like, we're spending a lot of time on Pauper Mono Red here, but we'll move on quickly, I promise. But you keep these hands that are like Blue Blast, Lightning Bolt, Pyroclasm, 3 lands, and you're like, got them. And then turn 4 rolls around. They still have 4 cards in their hand. You're still taking 4 in combat a turn. The sweeper didn't do anything. Every card replaced itself, or they just whacked you after the sweeper. It's tough.
For sure. Brian, a couple episodes ago in the pre-show, you were going off about Deadly Dispute, and I was like, I don't think they're actually going to hit it. And then I don't know if you two looked at the Paupergeddon results, but 7 of the 8 decks, and the 8th deck was actually 8th place, so the top 7 decks were all Deadly Dispute plus Ichor Wellspring black decks.
Yeah, obviously.
And they were just like, so the event was over 700 people, and they were just like, that was a discouraging result. They said that they made up their mind even before Paupergeddon. I'd like to believe them with that, but yeah, Deadly Dispute, just essentially being a 1 black draw 2, or Ancestral Recall with Ichor Wellspring, it was probably just too good for Pauper. I was playing Deadly Dispute in a slightly more fair way in Cycle Storm, but yeah, I get why they banned it.
Yep, and Gavin called out a really interesting thing, which is it's not even like there was a Deadly Dispute Mycospring.
Ichor Wellspring.
Ichor Wellspring, yeah. Deadly Dispute Wellspring deck. It was just a core engine. It was 8 cards that went in like 7 or 8 different top decks. And then decks could change colors or plans around that however they felt. But just putting that shit at the core of any deck felt like a cheat code. I did some Pauper brews over the last few years where somebody came to me with a dubious idea or brew around this concept, and I just started with those 8 cards, and I was like, we'll figure out the rest. Like these 8 cards plus the 4 cards from the stip from the brew challenge, and then it all just like comes together.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I was doing the same thing with Troll plus Reanimate and questionable legacy decks. I have multiple trophies with like Rakdos or Mardu shit piles, honestly, that were held together by Troll, Reanimate, and a couple other powerful cards.
Yes, Dispute Wellspring is Troll, Reanimate, and now they are both gone. Okay, so we'll do this quick. We are approaching our hour, and we still have a lot to talk about. Prophetic Prism unbanned in Pauper. There was another card that had a similar effect in Brothers War that didn't revitalize Tron, so they figured this was fine trying. And High Tide, which...
Energy Refractor.
Sure. Yep. And then High Tide, which is a whole cool engine. Bryant will have a video out this week on that probably the same day the pod goes live, I think.
Correct.
And we shouldn't spend a lot of time here because we spent a lot of time on Pauper. But one thing I want to talk about that is cool about Prophetic Prism and High Tide is these are trial unbans. This is different than crunching the numbers and determining this card is free. This is, we think these cards are okay, but we will watch them very closely for the next 3 months, and we might take them right away. And this was all explained by Gavin in his very long article about the Pauper updates. So the concept of a trial unban is pretty cool. And I don't know if that's something they could do in, I don't want to say real formats because we all love Pauper, but in like higher competitive formats. I don't know how to phrase that, but this is something the Pauper format panel has in their toolbox that Wizards of the Coast does not.
For what it's worth, I do think that Pauper is just as supported as Legacy at this point. Like, I guess we get Eternal Weekend, but that's about it.
Yeah, but Pauper gets Paupergeddon, and it's hard to say. Like, my line used to be, if a format ever leads to the Pro Tour, Wizards of the Coast has to manage it, not a community panel, even if they do ultimately report to Wizards of the Coast. They did take away even like team invites for the Pro Tour. If there's a team event right now, that qualifies for the Pro Tour, the Legacy seat does not get the queue, but the Modern and Standard players do. That's an actual policy. Yeah, Brian's making a face. I promise that is a real policy. Like NRG Series and Star City had to deal with that like a year and a half ago or so. I don't know if there are still MTGO PTQs where you could play Legacy and go straight to the Pro Tour. Maybe there are. Maybe there's Pauper ones. I don't know. But they actually took like a really hard yank back on Legacy, even as a backdoor to the Pro Tour, like a year and a half ago. And that does make me more sympathetic to the idea of a panel and the community running it a little more closer to Pauper than it is to Modern.
All right, and with that, let's go ahead and take a quick break, and then we'll talk about the winners and losers of the metagame to wrap up the episode. All right, welcome back. So last week in our episode, we did already kind of talk about some of our expected winners and losers. So if you haven't listened to that episode and you're really curious about our long form thoughts on it, it is there because we kind of predicted this. But based on what you have seen already in play, seen from online lists, who do you think are our immediate winners and losers? What are you expecting moving forward? Where's your head at?
I'm gonna go to the obvious place. Oops All Spells did not get a ban when it could have, and the other top graveyard deck in the format took a little hit. People should not back off of their graveyard hate. People should not think that you could just play super slow decks right now. And if you are going to play super slow decks, you need the sideboard or the tech to make it to that turn 3 turn. The format has not actually slowed down that much. That's my first winner. Someone else call one out.
I would like to call one out for you, Brian.
Let's go.
I believe that Control is a winner. Control gets to exist again, and I'm so happy for you personally, but I think the up the beanstalk strategies can come back, but I don't think they're going to be the natural predator to Oops All Spells that Wizards of the Coast was hoping for.
Yeah, I've been saying Control is not the solution to I was about to say to Wizards of the Coast, to Oops All Spells. That's just not how that works. Combo loves chewing up a ponderous slow blue deck and testing opening hands and everything. That's not the answer. Going from can't exist to does exist is certainly a win, even if it doesn't become a top deck.
So I am expecting a lot of Dimir tempo or maybe Dimir mid-range, a little slower. I think people are going to be very happy playing their Tamios, their Orcish Bowmasters, their Kaitos, their Barrow-goyfs. I think people who are playing those sorts of strategies are going to be eating good for a little while here.
Yeah, Dimir Tempo and Temur Delver were both top decks before this ban update, and they were both untouched, and they both continue to exist. I would not necessarily say Reanimator was a good matchup for either of them. I think Dimir Tempo was positive by the numbers versus Dimir Reanimator. Last time we looked, maybe it was Eternal Weekend. It might have been that long ago. But Delver certainly doesn't want to play against Archon of Cruelty. So that is a Predator slowed down for the tempo decks that were otherwise untouched.
I believe the stock-up decks are actually really big winners. I lump them together, but the Omnitel decks, Blue Painter, those are decks where they're doing super powerful things. They're leveraging one of the most broken cards to be printed in recent years, which is Stock Up. Like, I think that both of those decks are just incredible, and I would expect those to be top 5 decks.
Yeah, I hate to say it. This is part of the, is Control really a winner here? Going from non-existent to technically existent is a big win, but going from non-existent to existent in a metagame where Omnishow is really good is not good for Control decks. As a Control player, I've always hated playing against Show and Tell, and there is a new card coming out. Let me get the name of it real quick. I have it up in a chat. It's called Mistrise Village.
Oh, yeah.
This is going to be in Tarkir Dragonstorm. Yeah, this is so... I'm honestly a little salty that this exists. Okay, it is a land. It taps for blue. It enters tapped unless you control a mountain or forest. And the additional text is blue tap. The next spell you cast this turn can't be countered. So Sneaked Show and Omnishow tend to be Izzet and Simic, respectively. Those are the checks on this land. This is a original Beseju style effect. Doesn't enter tapped, doesn't cost life, taps for blue, it doesn't kill you in the interim. I am extremely worried about this card, and this will compound the stock up existing for decks like this one. This card is going to show up, and it's going to slot right into decks that are already good and already good against decks I want to play.
It is a card that is not a basic island, so like the Delver decks at least can wasteland that, sort of like how they can interact against Cavernous Souls versus a deck like, say, Goblins or Initiative or something. But when you don't have that wasteland, your Force of Will Daze hand all of a sudden is not doing anything.
Well, it depends on how much pressure there is, because they could just wait until, like, if they go like Volcanic Island, Ancient Tomb, that land, Lotus Petal, tap that land, bang. Like, they could on turn 3 have an uncounterable show and tell. And if they're not under quick pressure, then they could just wait until they naturally have their 5th mana. It could just be like 2 Volcanic Islands, 2 islands, that card out of hand, bang. Wasteland never had a chance. Those sequences, it's going to be really important to pressure these decks and put them in a spot where they don't have time to set that up, because it is going to be another inevitability button. And not to make this suddenly a Dragons of Cart or a Tarkir Dragonstorm spoiler episode, but that card reads, the Mysterized Village reads, your next spell is uncounterable. That could be the One Ring. That could be Teferi Time Raveler. That could be Ad Nauseam. I think this card is going to show up in Eternal formats in a big way. And decks that are already trying to win with a single spell are going to be massively favored for having access to it.
I'm going to pitch 2 possible solutions here. The first one is obvious. It's just Wasteland. Like, your Beanstalk control decks could play Wasteland. Maybe you even want Life from the Loam. Brian has in the past played Witherbloom Command, just some way to recur Wasteland to shut off the mountain or forest check. And then the other idea is more Jeskai control, which Brian doesn't feel as lovingly about, but Jeskai control does get to be a Blood Moon deck, and when you're a Blood Moon deck, that card does nothing. So I'm not saying it's going to outright kill control, I'm just saying that control has a couple tools it can use to fight back, and I'm not sure if they're even good enough, but they're at least things worth trying, right?
Yeah, I am strongly in favor of the Beanstalk style control decks, the bug or 4 or even 5 color Beanstalk decks that can come up with crushing, overwhelming board states, but can also do something like Tameo, Bowmaster, waste you, Witherbloom Command, waste you. Like, having access to those game plans is going to be important to actually pressure these decks. And I don't want to leave Red Stompy on the cutting room floor. We have not mentioned that one yet. We have called out the One Ring as probably the next ban target, and Red Stompy. And Eldrazi took a hit, and the deck with 7 Blood Moons was obviously well positioned versus Eldrazi in the metagame, but they don't have to play 7 Blood Moons. They could cut 3 of them or 4 of them and play Trinispheres or Rabble Masters or whatever it is they want to do.
Okay, so I'm going in.
Are we transitioning to losers here?
You don't want to fucking play Rabble Master. Rabble Master is dead. You don't get to play cards like that anymore. When your opponent just has like a fucking 5/6 life-linking Goyf on the other side of the battlefield, you absolutely cannot be sending 1/1 goblins that are forced to attack into that. So the Goblin Rabble Masters, the Legion War Bosses, you have to be really careful with. In traditional goblins, there is also the max speed one, whose name I definitely know because I recorded with it today.
Yeah, the Goblin Rabble Master that becomes Gaia's Cradle.
Yes, that Howl Squad Heavy. Shout out to Moxfield again. Howl Squad Heavy also does the same sort of thing. You have to be very careful in playing with these sorts of cards. So I drafted up my own Moon Stompy list for the post-ban world. And the first thing I did was try to cut my Magus of the Moons from the main deck. And I started looking at all the things that I would want to put in, and then left the Magus of the Moons in the main deck because they all felt problematic in some way. Trinisphere getting in the way of your pitch cast Fury, throw it with broadside lines was a really big deal in trying to promote Trinisphere back to the main deck.
Makes sense. Yeah, Phil would know. Would you consider Moonstomp be a winner, loser, or neutral after this announcement?
I think more people are going to be playing Goyfs, which is a problem. I found in my one league, sample size 5 games, that My deck wasn't actually great at being a prison deck. It wasn't great at locking people out. So like the Chalice starts and the Blood Moon starts weren't that great. And my starts that were actually just winning games easily were just like the broadside, throw something twice, kill you starts. So the aggro aspect of the deck felt really, really good. The prison elements felt whatever.
Are you on Lelia right now? Is there room for more snowballing?
I was not in my build. That was something I think is reasonable to try out in the Magus slots if you don't want to play Magus in game ones.
All right. Do we have any other winners or losers? We're about at our hour here. I feel like we've covered quite a bit.
I believe there's one that we are obligated to talk about, which is where do we feel that Reanimator is? I think the large legacy audience will assume that it's a loser. Do we feel that way?
It lost something. It's not dead. It's still very good.
I'm going to say it's neutral. I think it got worse, obviously, but I think it's still very good.
Right.
I think you have to work harder now, which is good. The initial Grixis builds that I've seen feel a little bit clunky. I have seen a deck of that nature have 2 Badlands in play and not be able to cast their spells properly. That came up in one of the leagues that I played. I think you have to jump through more hoops. I'm going to say small loser. Like your deck is still absolutely playable. Your deck is still absolutely good, but it's probably going to take a while to find the best builds.
Yeah, I played against Arkan today on stream in one of my leagues, and I kept a hand on the play that did not interact with the graveyard, but it had a bunch of cantrips and stuff. And then I got Dark Ritual and Tomb Reanimated like it was 2015. So that is another piece involved. That is a line that is soft to graveyard hate. Surgical Extraction might be back on the menu, but that deck is still good. What shell emerges? Is it Oliphant? Is it Dark Ritual? What are we doing? Are we on critical density of monsters we could Faithless Loot into? Are we still trying to play the thin Entomb package with just the 2? We'll see. But Reanimator is still a completely viable deck. It will just look slightly different.
There were multiple mono black Reanimator lists in the initial 5.0 decklist dumps from the post-banning world. One of which had a sideboard card, some 3-mana creature that could make a token copy of a creature that entered your graveyard this turn.
That sounds made up.
I'm not going to fish it out because we're at the very tail end of the podcast here, but look into the mono black Reanimator deck lists if that sounds interesting to you.
One final thing real quick, guys, is during Eternal Weekend, there were lists that did not play Troll of Khazad-dûm that instead had a show and tell package inside of Reanimator. They were championed by Bob Huang. I'm just saying that those ones were relatively left untouched, and Sam Brukas ended up making, I believe, top 32 in the United States with that list.
Cool. So the homework assignment for everyone at this point is pour over those deck dumps, those MTG Goldfish, that MTG Top 8. Look at what's actually coming out. Look at what's happening. Don't get caught by surprise by show and tell in a Reanimator main deck if that's something that you could have seen if you did a little homework. We're all in that phase right now. We want to see what shakes out. We're all trying stuff. The meta's not that different, but it is just slightly less oppressive.